So, good morning, everyone. Begin with the reflections on universal well-being. May I
abiding well-being, in freedom from affliction, in freedom from hostility, in freedom from ill will, in freedom from anxiety, and may I maintain well-being in myself. May everyone abide in well-being, in freedom from hostility, in freedom from ill will, in freedom from anxiety, and may they maintain well-being in themselves. May all beings release from all suffering, and may they not be parted from the good fortune they have attained. When they act upon intention, all beings are the owners of their action, and inherit its results. The future is born from such action, companion to such action, and the results will be their home. All actions with intention, be they skillful or harmful, of such acts there will be the heirs.
So, good morning. Today I was thinking of reflecting on a topic that actually my mom posed to me recently, namely on the topic of student stress. It's a very hot topic in education, and they were going to discuss it in their school board. She asked me and a number of her friends what were our thoughts about that. And as I read the email, I was kind of reflecting on, also recently Reverend Shi shared a story about a Stanford student that committed suicide. I think her name was Katie Meyer, kind of a star goalie of the women's soccer team. This is maybe just 2 or 3 days ago that discovered her body, and her parents shared how they just had talked to her, I think maybe the day before or the night before, and everything seemed fine. In the article it said there were no red flags. Everything seemed fine. And everyone said she was so vibrant, so alive, successful, had all these awards, playing soccer. And clearly going to Stanford, it's also not easy. And Reverend Shi said this is the 4th one in a year. And so I thought, just kind of remembering my days back in college and the stress of being a student. And I remember being in my college dorms, and actually at one point, one of the students actually cut her wrists. And it was basically an attempted suicide. She was taken to the psych ward at Stanford, and I remember visiting with some of my fellow dorm mates. We went to visit her in the Stanford hospital. I think there was maybe like 5 or 6 of us, and we were standing around her bed. And I was really struck because one by one, the students around me were sharing their own struggles with depression, with kind of frustration, in a way that was quite eye-opening for me. I hadn't realized how much suffering everyone around me was in. Because on the surface, everyone looks so vibrant and happy. Everything going well. And I think there's this phenomenon in our society, especially in the Bay Area, where there's so much emphasis on external success and looking a certain way that internally it can feel very empty and very meaningless and hollow. I remember this girl who cut her wrist, so I did it so I can feel something. I really wanted to feel something. Remember that was what she was saying to us. And so I don't really know what's the right response. My mom's saying that she needs to maybe share in the school board about about student stress. Because I think this issue goes actually quite deep. Quite deep. I remember another experience, high school. Another classmate actually did commit suicide on the local community college lawn. She took a lot of sleeping pills and ended her life. And I knew her because, actually, in fact, I think her grandmother was my caretaker when I was a little kid. But I didn't know her extremely well, but we had class together, and we definitely had conversations and projects together. And she had a number of times talking about how life was meaningless, how everything was empty. I remember she was doing kind of acting, and she would act out actual plays where she would kill herself. And I think no one really probably connected the dots until maybe after the fact. And this is, I think, the most maybe extreme form of student stress, is when it leads to somebody actually taking their life. But there's many other forms too, of just being angry and or taking drugs, or lots of things that we do in order to kind of cope with the stress. But as I was reflecting, trying to reflect on it for my mother, I think there's a couple of things that might be useful, at least from a dharmic perspective. I think we've learned the Four Noble Truths, or you can say the 4 places of reflection. And the first one is what? Is that there's dukkha. It's often translated as suffering, but I think we can also translate it as stress. As stress. And interesting, I think this is sometimes a misconception around the Buddha's teachings. His teachings on dukkha isn't, the first noble truth isn't to say, let's get rid of dukkha. That's not the first noble truth. Or escape from dukkha. Or deny dukkha. Rather, he says, we have to recognize it and understand it. I think what we then realize is that this stress is part of the human condition. The Buddha gives a whole list: old age, sickness, and death, not getting what we want, losing those we love, and really clinging to, they say the 5 skandhas, the body, the feelings, our perceptions, our deep underlying patterns of behavior, and our consciousness. So the Buddha really goes deeply into this topic of suffering and stress, as saying this is part of the human condition. our experience of suffering, it's not wrong. Rather, this is just what it means to live in this conditioned existence. And then I think what's interesting is the Buddha has us look inward for the causes of suffering. Of course, there's conditions of suffering that can come from outside. The way our society is structured, our parents' expectations, our own kind of, I feel our own expectations is where the Buddha goes, going inward. And he says that these causes of suffering, of stress, at a deeper level come from this addiction to sensual gratification. Or maybe more simply, in modern terms, we're just constantly getting distracted with screens and exciting things, both good and bad. Right? The news is there to kind of sensationalize and grab us. And then there's another one, which I think this is one's probably particularly deep in our society, at least in the Bay Area, is the cause of becoming. That we want to be somebody, to be okay. We're not enough. Somehow we can't just settle in our current experience, but we have to do something more, we have to add something on top of that to be okay. The deep sense of lacking. I'm not good enough. My experience is not fun enough. It's not exciting enough. And we just keep going out chasing some kind of ideal perfection. I think this happened a lot at Stanford. Always chasing material success, status, money, power, relationships. Endless. It's endless. And we're trying to be as perfect and as successful in as many as possible, if not all of them. And just the suffering and stress increases. Or, say, abhava, a non-becoming, is in that process of seeking. We're just frustrated. And we say, I just don't want to deal with this anymore. So we just want to numb ourselves to not become. And this is where suicide becomes the most extreme form of that. To just end it all. So I don't have to experience this. These are the causes of suffering. And so the Buddha was actually pretty clear. He said first is to really look at suffering clearly. Second is to really see how we kind of create our own suffering through, you could say, confusion that we have. And then I think, I realize I don't want to not end on that note, so I'll just give you the last two, which are pretty important. And actually quite revolutionary, I think, in terms of how oftentimes life is presented to us. That there is a way out of suffering, but it's not in the way that we often think about, which is through more excitement, more success, or just numbing ourselves. There's actually a way out. A way to find genuine happiness, deep inner peace and well-being. And this is, the Buddha said, there is a path. There's a way. And this, if I just maybe put it simply, is living a life of integrity. It's really listening to my heart. Listening to this kind of inner voice, our conscience. And saying, how do I live a life that's attuned to this place of caring for myself and caring for those around me? It seems very simple. But I think sadly in our schools we're rarely taught that. Rarely taught how do we really care for ourselves and for those around us and listen to that inner voice inside. Sometimes it's rarely taught in families too. Right? For parents, oftentimes the topics are, what grade did you get in school? How did you do in homework? How do you compare to your fellow classmates? Did you win the game? It's like, gosh, a lot of suffering. And then there's an actual training, a kind of collecting our body, hearts, and minds back together. A kind of groundedness, a practice in groundedness. This often becomes meditation or mindfulness, but another way of saying what helps us ground ourselves. Maybe just going for a walk. Enjoying nature. So many of things in our lives just unground us now. And finally, the last one, if you're going to use this precept, samadhi, wisdom, the last one, which is wisdom, maybe in more secular language, is seeing clearly. Seeing things clearly. A kind of willingness to be real honest. Wisdom comes from seeing clearly. Not just seeing clearly, seeing deeply. I look past the surface to what's the underlying causes beneath. Past the immediate experience to the deeper causation that happens over time. And then wisdom also has a component which is skillfully responding. So then I actually, from that depth of clarity, respond skillfully with care and compassion. And to me, that's really the training. There's many ways I think in our society we're trying to address stress or student stress, and I think it's got maybe different levels of success if you really were to go into it. I won't go into all of them because I don't know all of them, number one, but it would probably take too long. But it's just to say, there's actually a way to address this within the Buddha's teachings that I think is quite complete. And actually that's one of the things here I think we're hoping to do here at River Vihara, is to create a community and a place, of course in all our monasteries, but a community and place where a different set of values could be embodied and held as a community, where we're looking less at external kind of markers of success and supporting more the internal for well-being. So maybe just share that much. Don't know if that's helpful at all, but I think it's actually an important reflection for all of us in this time when there's a lot of stress and suffering. So how do I face the suffering in my life? How can I do it with wisdom and compassion? Okay, so sorry, being a little bit longer today. But let's do the 3 steps, 1 bow.